if you look at Russia, China, and India, just those three countries, that's a better part of humanity.
Right. Right.
Those three countries are now being joined by more than 45 other countries in the attempt to develop a new financial system, a new basket of
BRICS.
currencies or currency itself that's pegged to gold. Now, why would they bother to do this? Remember, our financial geniuses in the Fed have been telling us for years gold doesn't matter.
Right.
Well,
That's
then
right.
why do banks keep gold around? Well, it's a
Right.
tradition. Really? I would love to start a tradition like that and keep, tons of gold in my
Yeah.
account.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
worth anything. The bottom line is that they have had it with our financial dominance because we've used the World Bank and the other institutions at our disposal that we dominate to bully people, to
Right.
make them do things that they otherwise would not do. All the sort of proverbial chickens are coming back to roost, as you say.
Right. Right.
But Americans have got to wake up and they've got to
Yeah.
understand that what we're trying to achieve in this country is we want to resurrect America. I
Right.
mean, it's gotten to the point now where America is in ruins. Somebody said to me, America is a patient on life support.
Mm.
Maybe. I don't know. I've got lots of friends. I'll tell you what, the people that are most acutely sensitive to this are people who've immigrated to the country
Hmm.
from Europe or
Hmm.
Northeast Asia, sometimes from the Middle East, because the legal immigrants
Right.
come here with a different set of expectations, a different
Right.
set of goals and desires. By the way, they really want to be Americans.
Right.
And
Exactly.
they see a population here that's lost its sense of identity or allowed a government to rob it of its identity.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
insane. That's the death of America. And I
Yeah.
think that's what the left is about. I think the left wants America to look like California.
Right.
So what do you
Right.
do? Well, you have to make the society look like California. You have to make the armed forces look like
Hmm.
California.
Yeah.
That's happening. When I came into the army years ago, this is back in the 70s, late 70s, non-commissioned officers would look at you while you were standing out there in formation. They'd walk up to somebody who didn't look quite right, and they'd say, "Son, are you strange or are you from California?" And everybody would chuckle under their breath. Well, there was some truth in that question.
Right. Right. Right.
And now you look at the ranks and you look at the people they want to bring in, and then you look at the people they want to get rid of. And it looks an awful lot like they want to make it the Californian, what is it, the California fornication or something?
Yeah. Yeah.
Bring back
Californication.
the
That's right.
military.
Yeah.
And that'll
That's
mean we have no military at all. It'll be destroyed.
right.
This
Right.
whole idea of a meritocracy, which we think we had, it was never perfect. Nothing is ever perfect.
No.
But now we have walked away from it completely.
Right.
We want to
Right.
advance people for every conceivable reason, but demonstrated character, competence, and intelligence. Those are the things that should count. And apparently for the left, they don't count.
They don't count. Yeah, I've heard it actually referred to as refeudalization. It's sort of a new kind of caste system where you have bankers and billionaires amassing so much power in the hands of very, very few. At the same time, instead of having a clerical class sort of imposing a religious fundamentalism, as it were, on people, you have a clerisy class of these university profs and Hollywood celebrities and so forth, imposing this radical ideology that's every bit as prone to excommunication, right? I.e., cancel culture as anything else, right? Just ask Tucker, for heaven's sakes, with that. So do you have any hope for an off ramp here, Colonel? I mean, the Ukrainian counteroffensive, as you noticed, it's now widely admitted as total failure. Are there any cool heads left in the swamp or in Brussels or in London that want to dial this escalating insanity back?
Well, I wouldn't look for any rationality or reason right now from the swamp in Washington, New York City, or London. Remember, New York City and London are the two big banking centers.
Right.
Their interests are bound up with this war and destroying Russia for the reasons we've already covered. But inside Washington, no, it's donor driven.
Yeah.
All the donors want the war. If the donors changed their minds tomorrow morning and say no more war, then Washington would walk in a different direction.
Right.
But there is hope in Europe. And even though Europe is beset with its own set of problems, I think there is a growing realization that they've walked into a giant bear trap and they want to get out.
Right.
At the Vilnius conference, behind the scenes, Schultz tried to tell Biden, we Germans don't want to destroy Russia. That's not what we signed up for. We don't want that. I think Schultz knows, I think Macron knows, and certainly Sunak knows they're not long for the political world they're operating in.
Right.
They're not going to be around long.
Right.
Now, what comes next, I think, will be a series of governments. There'll be confusion. But one thing people will agree to, we don't want to be part of this war against Russia.
Right.
I always joke because I run into so many of my Norwegian friends that are so anxious to fight. I say, well, where are all those Norwegian formations outfitted and ready to commit to the Eastern Front? You know, it's a joke. Nobody wants to go there and fight. No. It's all being done on the backs of Ukrainians.
Right.
Nobody seems to care that their cemeteries are filling up. No one seems to care we're destroying their families.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. So I think the Europeans are our best hope. Right. That they will eventually change governments. People will walk in and say enough's enough.
Right.
And then what happens here? I don't know, Steve. What do you think? What do you think will happen here?
Yeah, well, the uprising seems to be really happening around the country. We just got a Gallup poll that just came out that conservatives are now outnumbering liberals almost 2-1, and it's been a massive upswing in the last 10 years, which is very interesting because it kind of corresponds with the efforts at wokeness and imposing wokeness. The more even the left seems to have had it, like Bill Maher and so forth, with woke things. But I guess for me, the concern really is just, when all is said and done, the integrity of our elections. I mean, so many of us feel like, we can have all the numbers in the world, but, if there's some shenanigans going on in certain states like, Arizona or Georgia or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, we just feel like just easily thwarted through the standard American ballot process. And then, as Vivek Ramaswamy said, and then, when that's thwarted like that, then you do get these J6, kind of explosions and so forth. So that's what makes me nervous. But I think we've got the numbers. It's just trying to, we're as you said, we're against the billionaires and the bureaucrats and the CEOs and the legacy media all teaming up. And it's a very formidable opponent. But as Victor Davis Hanson would say, but they don't have the people. The people refuse to bend the knee. And that's really what gives me hope.
Well, Victor Davis Hanson, and I like him very much, and he makes a lot of good points, but he's missing something. And that is that we're not organized. Yeah. We're not organized. Where is the leadership? Somebody was talking to me yesterday and talking about the Tea Party and the MAGA movement and so forth. And why didn't these work? Why weren't we more successful? Well, there was no leadership. There was no direction.
Right.
And I was not present for the January 6th demonstrations. I was in the Pentagon working, but I did see film footage of it afterwards. One of the first things that I asked was, where are all the tables to register all of these people that attended this so that they can be mobilized in the future?
Yeah. Right.
I didn't see anything.
Right.
And this is my only complaint about the Trump organization. There was no organization. Donald Trump was always the Lone Ranger. I think he still is. Right. I don't see an organization out there.
Right.
And, I have a lot of affection for the president, and I certainly wish him well. I'm also very supportive of RFK Jr. I think he, too, is on the right track. I think we need to understand something. This old Republican-Democrat traditional
dichotomy,
forget it. I don't think it means anything anymore. I grew up with lots of Democrats. I was always a Republican. That was you were definitely a minority in Philadelphia, where I grew up in the 50s and 60s. But I can tell you that all the Democrats then were solid Americans.
Yeah.
They were 100% Americans.
Yeah.
There was no question about anything. And if you'd tried to tear down the flag or a statue, they'd have been on top of you in a heartbeat, and you'd have had your head handed to you. If you didn't stand up for the national anthem, you were in deep trouble. I mean, this doesn't mean anything anymore now. We've got to find a way to put that behind us. Understand these big machines that supply the swamp with cash and keep it flush. They're not on our side.
Right.
We've got to go in a different direction, and we've got to reach out to everybody who agrees with us.
Right.
And that's the other thing is we got to get to the what I call the 70 or 80% rule. If you can agree with 80% of what's said, well, then sign on.
Right. Right.
You're always going to find something that you don't like.
Right.
Well, I don't want any abortions ever. Well, I certainly am sympathetic to that, but that's not going to work.
Right.
You're always going to have exceptions.
Right.
And those exceptions can be justified on a whole range of grounds. Let's not fight over that.
Right.
Let's look at what we can unite to stop, to marginalize, to quit. We'll never get rid of all criminality. We know that. You can't. Just because you lock everybody up or shoot everybody, you're still going to have criminality. But there's a threshold beyond which you can't tolerate anything else. We've tolerated too much nonsense for too long. It's killing us.
It is. It is. And we are, I think we're there in the sense that the 70-80% unity you're talking, I mean, racism is an all-time low. All the polls show that. You know, if you had asked somebody 50 years ago, do you believe in interracial marriage? 90% would have said no. We've got the data on it. Today, 90% say sure, no problem. We've never had racism so low. We've never had so many Americans so anti-war as they are now, as I understand, even at the height of the Vietnam era. We are so united in many respects. And yet what's our permanent political class always doing? You know, racism, and, you know, and Ukraine, more war. And it's
the political class, as we've discussed, is owned by somebody else.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're not responsive to the population.
Exactly.
And we have deep divisions in our society. We're not going to solve any of those problems by fighting wars overseas against people that are largely irrelevant to us.
Right.
And that's the critical issue, because right now, as soon as I was talking to somebody else, you know, he's on the Hill, and he was saying, well, you know, when he dismantled the Chinese threat, which is eminently possible, China has enormous problems internally that make it impossible for them to expand or do anything else. But you've got 1.4 billion people.
Right. Wow.
Xi wakes up every morning worried about whether or not he's still going to have a job. Right. But he's not worried about us, and he's not interested in destroying us. That's a lot of nonsense.
Right.
But now people are saying, well, you know, I think it was DeSantis. I'll go after Mexico. I'll do this. Well, listen, first of all, let's close the border.
Yeah, right.
Secondly, let's end the criminality to the best of our ability, and let's tell all of the illegals in this country, you got 90 days to get out.
Yeah.
And if you leave on your own, take your things with you, register on the way out. We'll consider you for readmission in the future. But right now, you've got to leave.
Right.
Okay, that has to happen. Right. And the drug cartels, if you really seal the border, you bring the United States Coast Guard back from the South China Sea and the Persian Gulf, and put them in the littoral waters of the United States and the Caribbean, the Pacific, we'll shut down most of the drugs that we're talking about. Right. Let's do those things first. Now, after that, we can look at who is still in Mexico that presents a threat to us. But we don't need to make war on a whole country.
No.
Now, this is just stupid.
Right.
But this is the sort of passion that you find in Washington. It's always, let's find a new enemy. Oh, here's an enemy. Right. Here's an enemy. Here's an enemy.
Right.
We just don't need to go down that path anymore. We need to back away from it.
Do you think that's a reaction to sensing that we're losing the unipolar world, that a multipolar world is rising and the American hegemony is disappearing, and so it's almost like grasping desperations to try to hold things, like bullying, as people would say?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of desperation. They're clinging tenaciously to a past that is rapidly disappearing. You know, this was the so-called unipolar moment of 1991, 92.
Yeah.
And what did it mean? You know, what it meant to those of us who were serving on the ground in Germany was, well, look, I don't think we need to be here anymore.
Right.
So why not turn this over to the Europeans and let's go home? Right. Oh, no, you can't do that. Wow. If you do that, they'll all go to war with each other.
Right.
Well, maybe. I don't think so. But
that's
ultimately their business, is it not? Well, we'll have to come back again. I don't think. I think we need to re-examine what we're doing at home. We need prosperity. We need security. at home.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think NATO's going to survive this transition into a multipolar world?
Not in its current form, no. I thought when this whole thing began that it would become increasingly obvious that there was no willingness to wage war on Russia in Europe. And as it became more and more obvious, it would be harder and harder to hold this dinosaur together. It said it was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Right. Right.
What is it now? Is it Urals to the Atlantic Alliance?
That's
It's just crazy. It's grown to the point where it's so unwieldy you can't hold it together. No, I think
right.
it'll go away. I always favored Europeanizing it. I
Mhm.
thought in the back of the '90s, let's get a European general in there to be the supreme commander. Let's dump this World War II legacy of the supreme commander Europe. This is what we had at the end of the Second World War. You had Eisenhower, then you had Montgomery, and so forth. Let's get rid of all that.
Right.
It's up to the Europeans. Now, the Europeans may decide they want perhaps 2 or 3 different alliance systems.
Hmm.
I mean, arranging for security is very much a local matter.
Right.
It's not a global matter.
Right.
And regionalizing is what's happening around the world. You see regions coalescing into new organizational constructs.
Right.
I think it's a normal phenomenon. I don't see it as a threat.
Yeah.
That's the way people do business with their neighbors, with the people
Yep.
that are nearby. We ought to sort of say, fine, that's great. We have a wonderful position here between the Atlantic and the Pacific. We
Right.
can do business with everybody if we want to. And this business of 32 nations under sanctions right now,
Yeah.
for what?
Right.
Because someone in the Senate, they're not sufficiently democratic. I don't like their human rights record.
Right. Right.
I'm so tired of this. I mean,
Yeah.
I love my country, but I don't think we should set ourselves up as the model of pristine perfection under any circumstances.
No.
So this
That's for
business
sure.
of judging everyone is a lost cause. Somebody said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." Well, we've been throwing boulders for a long time. I think it needs to stop.